Hey. Good afternoon and welcome, everybody. Today is Tuesday, August 15th, and this is the 5 p.m. Town Council Finance Committee meeting. I'll call this meeting to order and note that we have a full committee present. Thank you both for being here. The first item is to approve the minutes from July 12th, 2023. Those were sent with the packet last week. Everybody have a chance to review those? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
Nope.
All those in favor? Minutes are approved. Next, we're here today to primarily talk about school impact fees. We've got a presentation or a discussion with Karen Martin from the Scarborough Economic Development Corporation, who's been helping guide this work. And I think we have some just accounting of what fees have been collected in the past to kind of kick us off. So beyond that, I think our role is going to be mostly to listen and react or respond to some prompts that you guys might have for us.
Yeah, just to provide introductory comments, as you're well aware, the council set a goal for this year. Many goals. One of which was to take the comprehensive look at our impact fees about as appropriate, and then perhaps the advance of new ones. So to that end, back in June, I provided kind of a preliminary plan, if you will, in terms of the timeline, in terms of how we can advance this work. And what we're here this evening is really kind of the next step in that. Still on track to bring forward update to our school impact group for the next couple of months. And then there's 3 other factors. So we're going to do this advancement. The other ones will require legal work and some studies like that rationale. But I see no reason not to kind of move this forward in phases. And among all of them, school impact fee is really important to serve the valuable purpose for over 20 years now. And it's produced about $7.2 million in impact fees that are part in large part offsetting school debt. School debt in particular. There have been a couple of off chances in the recent years where past councils have approved use of these funds for different capital investments, particularly around public classroom schools, residents, school development. But the standard bearer for use of these funds has been to bring in general fund into the budget process to offset school debt costs. And we've done that to have some level of comfort and certainty that monies that we propose to use for actual collections for 2 years prior. So we're not working on speculation and estimation. We're working with that overseas. And so that number does fluctuate depending on the involved capital. But it's no numbers in the national position. The last thing I'll say is that like all impact fees, there must be an ordinance passed by the legislative body to put this in place, and that's the process we have to follow. I did include the existing current ordinance that again was first put in place back in 2002. You might note by way of rationale of reference a submission to the Department of Education that there's a date of 2012 and it references the number of school projects contemplated at the time. Many of which have been addressed back in the years, and so we now are presented with a very good opportunity with all the work being done and aid solutions that have much better numbers, better defense, and for all of you advance new on up-to-date impact fee. And Karen has a unique set of skills, I'll say, and is kind enough to assist in this. And she's laid out a number of different scenarios. None of these are all necessarily. We're looking kind of broaden the conversation with the input as to which methodology makes the most sense. And there's a number of key questions as we go through, especially we'll talk through it, that will help kind of inform which of those methodologies makes the sense. So that's kind of an introduction. Office here, we put together the kind of the historical information so we can sort of respond to questions there, and I'll kind of really
Would you guys like to hear from Norm first on the data that's collected regarding previous impact fee collections before we get started on potentially new methodology?
Why don't we do that quickly if Norm doesn't mind?
So the schedule is a historical reflection of revenues collected, interest earned, and transfers to the general fund. And as we get into 21 and 22, we're a little behind on making entries on the general ledger because of staff issues, and it's just a matter of transferring cash between bank accounts. But we once all the transfers are caught up and made, there's about 480,642 in the account available, and the past practice has been to whatever's collected in a given year is transferred 2 years later to the general fund, so that it kind of has a chance to make sure it sits there and is available.
So really put this money to use almost not immediately, but it's not linked, it's not collected it. And that's because we consistently had fairly rapid school record since the beginning of the bookings. And therefore, I think we didn't use the funds.
So you can just touch on that for a minute. So 2 years, I don't know whether that, it sounds long to me, but is that like a standard practice, or is it something that we're just implementing now?
It's been in place for primarily since the impact fee was put into place.
Pretty me, I don't know
Yeah.
if Kate has any recollection on the derivation of that, but I think it was probably a really cool suggestion of my predecessor. I think the value of having it 2 years prior gives us great certainty that those actions were actual.
You wait for your audit to happen.
I see.
So you,
So just stay with that for a minute if we could. So in a normal year, I know our audit was delayed this year, but in a normal year, this coming year, when would that normally be? The 2-year review and funding?
It's not really review, it's in any given budget, the actual monies that we put in as the revenue of the fund, the budget, offset debt, is actually the actual receipts from 2 years prior. So
Okay,
I wouldn't characterize it as review, that's just the process that we have. There's a couple of deviations that some of you were involved in. Again,
so for this fiscal year that we just ended, when will that be done? When would this be done for the impact fees for that year?
That money would transfer in 2025.
Right. And what month in 2025?
Traditionally, they've been done in March.
I see.
So I don't know that there's a policy or ordinance or anything that dictates when.
Yeah.
My sense is that timing is very soon after audit reports have been issued in the past. So it would probably correspond with audit reports issued. You transfer the money shortly thereafter.
So we made a commitment to produce our audit on a more timely basis this coming year. So what is
We
the date for
could
that?
anticipate January.
Right. So I just suggest in January, we want to make sure that we reflect back on the impact fees, and we probably speak to it at that time. But thank you. Thanks.
so for fiscal 24, if I'm following this, we collected in 2022, 443,890. In this year's budget, I'm assuming that's what we had in the fiscal 24 budget. Case nodding.
Yes.
Okay.
So by the time we get to
You know the number. Now, oh, go
Sorry.
ahead.
Okay, no, so I understand the process, but after that, sitting on it for 2 years, it goes to the general fund and the impact fee can be used for anything? Or it can only be used towards capital improvements?
It's only, it's limited by ordinance and statute. You can only use impact fees for the purposes that they were collected. And in our
So when I
case-
read the ordinance, it says like improvements, capital and things like that.
And again, we've always had fairly significant school debt, and so that our rationale is that we offset those debt costs with impact fees. And it's only a portion of debt costs. We wish we could offset it all.
And you can use impact fees for debt.
To pay off the debt for like the high school in Wentworth.
Oh, for debt for previous capital improvements is what, right, yes, yeah.
Yeah, so
Thank
usually
you.
you front the project by issuing bonds.
Right.
And then these impact fees can help you pay off those bonds.
So interesting, unlike most, all of that, no, I should say most, where we've just been collecting funds and we haven't ever had enough to actually do the project that was contemplated. We've actually made fairly quick work, a consistent use of these funds, through this system. As particular needs arise, I characterize them as a crisis or taking work at time. There are particular capital needs that need to be addressed out of budget cycle in one case. And this is a pot of money that we did with the use of the capital.
So this has been in place for over 10 years, right? It looks like 2002 was the first time we did it. So it's, it's not the first time that we've started buying portables or building schools, right? We've been at this for a while. So that's something I have to agree with Councilor Shoup's question that, it does seem that you should be able to use it for operating expenses, but you can't. It's got to be.
Capital improvements is what.
Right.
Is.
Yeah, that's not what I don't think it should be. I was
Yeah.
wondering if that's actually what it was. And I think the
Right.
other question or comment I'll make is it used towards the portables? Because when I look at that definition, I mean, a portable isn't an improvement.
Thank you.
Um,
You're bringing me back a couple of years. I agree with you.
Is that calling you against that idea? But
I did. So capital improvement is a real thing, right? It should be permanent fixture. It should be attached to a foundation, have. So most of our portables are actually, they would meet that standard. But there are a couple, like the ones at Eight Corners that they were put in the middle of the parking lot that don't. Well, maybe loosely they could, but I think I asked the code officer and he said it was a semi-permanent or semi-temporary. Anyway, so that's right. Which is what, that was a standard.
We were eager to find funds to buy them.
Yeah.
As I recall.
As I recall, a circumstance, at least one of them, we did some, actually the school alerted us to it, but it had awareness about this time of year, probably in July, that they had 96 more kindergarten kids coming than they had the previous. Trying to understand what the circumstances were, but the fact is those kids were coming. We didn't have much time to that.
Yeah, nor with us not transferring funds for 2 years. How's that gonna affect our financials next year? Is it gonna be a boost to the general funds?
No, it's
Fund
balance
balance?
sheet only.
Okay.
The revenue, the budgetary revenue and expense was entered. It was just not the actual balance sheet transfer that didn't occur.
Okay, so the schedules in the annual statement
Yeah.
were correct.
Exactly.
I had a question that may be totally, off the rails here, but do we coordinate this at all, or is there any connection with the cost to serve? How are impact fees related at all to cost to serve, and if so, how?
Sure, I'll feel that. So the cost of service has always been about service delivery, as opposed to capital improvements. So that's really the fundamental difference there. Although I think when we go back, we're always using the total school budget to divide by the number of students to get that figure. So there's some probably debt service in there, but in general, the cost of service is about service delivery, operating expenses, and non-capital.
So snow plowing and fire and public safety, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the provision of the school delivery, like the teachers, the administration and all.
Okay. Great, thanks.
Sure.
Any other questions on the impact fee schedule? No, thank you, no. Take it away.
Okay, so I just start out with reading straight from the state statutes about the impact fees, particularly with respect to understanding what you can and can't use it for. And that directly relates to how I approach the mechanics looking at with new a different approach for impact fees. So the state is very clear, the amount of the fee must be reasonably related to the development's share of the capital infrastructure improvements made necessary by the development. Or if the improvements were constructed at municipal expense prior to development, the fee must be reasonably related to the portion or percentage of the infrastructure used by the developer. So the statute doesn't go into how you calculate that. But it does mean that we have to make some attempts to say, hey, if we're building a new school project, how much of that cost really belongs to the existing enrollment versus what we're planning for the future? And that's really the mechanics of what I was going through and presented to you in the various tables. And so I'll go through that. But I also wanted to talk about the couple of things that we have some choices on. We will. So I'm looking at trying to allocate how much of this development or how much of the school cost, and for the purposes of this exercise, we use 160 million, which is 137 plus.
The only comment I had on that was, so you're gonna collect these impact fees over presumably the next 30 years or something, right? And you're gonna be paying that's 160 million over the next 30 years. Seems to me that it could be easily justified that instead of just having the principal, you include interest in that.
Absolutely. That's one of my questions is, this is this is the direct cost. It's not inflated by any cost of financing or anything like that. And that is definitely within the purview of adding into the impact fee.
Okay.
But for the simplicity of this, we use 160 million of the direct costs.
Interestingly, Karen made a point of saying that the law doesn't describe how to do this. It's up to us to justify or rationale. The ones that will question us are the development community. And so we seem to have a straight-faced rationale. That's what this has to do with the follow the civil process.
And the good news is, I think the development community is, they may not like it, but they're used to paying this impact. We've had an impact for, as we said, 20 years. So this is just about looking at what's coming online, what we're going to be spending some money on, tying those fees directly back to that 160 million. And again, there may be other costs that you're going to throw in. If you're looking about the next 10 years, if there are other capital expenses, this is the time to throw that into the kettle, if you will. So we want to look at the percentage allocated to this increase. And then we also need to give a nod to the turnover. And I'll explain that in a second. So you want to be able to allocate how much of this is coming from new units coming into town versus how much is coming from, hey, this single family home turned over from, empty nesters to a family of 4. So there's a little bit of art to figuring out how we come up with those numbers. And then the piece that we did not do in this is the existing ordinance does allocate different costs for different types of units. And right now this analysis is just saying, hey, we expect 261 units to be built each year based on the new rate of growth ordinance. So we didn't attempt to allocate, well, single family is going to be X, multi-family is going to be Y. We need to make that decision that, yes, you want to look at that. That's the way the existing ordinance does it. And that your choices may be that you want to look at, rather than type of unit, go back to what the rate of growth ordinance says, which is talking about the number of bedrooms. But those are all choices that we need to look at. And again, I'm going to say the other thing that we did not look at, or that we did not subtract out, was any difference for affordable housing. All that 261 units is the estimate of what we said in the growth ordinance. All of those units were used to figure this out. So if we want to remove something, that can also change that calculation. So let me go into sort of the mechanics here of what we did, and that's, I'm looking at this table that's in the memo, and they're really split into two pairs. The first pair, scenarios 1 and 2, are looking at the analysis of new students in K through 3. And since that's the segment of the population that is increasing over the rest of the school population, when we look at K through 3, the number of spaces that we're talking about, so the bottom line here is, if you're only at K through 3, the actual enrollment is about 878. The projected enrollment that was used in the K through 8 solution was 1,130, and that took the enrollment numbers that were done and really increased them by 5%. So that's where those numbers came directly from that report. And so if we subtract out the actual enrollment from the projected enrollment, there's 252 new students or more capacity over the existing enrollment. Therefore, that's about 22%. And that's what I use to say, okay, that's for new students, new development. That's the development cost assigned to additional students. And so I applied that 22.3% to the total $160 million. And that's where you get, in this first scenario, $35 million, or 35.6.
Karen, do you know what our existing capacity is for K to 3 as opposed to enrollment?
That's a very good question.
Seems like that should be what you're comparing against.
Are you suggesting
I don't know what the number is, but the idea with the impact fee is you need more capacity to handle the new development. I suspect we're at capacity at the K 3, but I don't really know because 3's in Wentworth right now.
certainly creates the capacity. So
Right.
from this point forward,
How much extra capacity are you creating? That's the question.
So I seem to recall there was capacity in the high school in terms of square feet per student and also capacity at Wentworth. I can't give you exact figures,
Sure.
but I recall that from the meetings that were held on the new solution. So that, go ahead.
today, none of those kids
Right,
are gonna move through the system.
Right.
So that has to be-
And because I was partnering the K through 3, I'm working with this 160 million.
Mhm.
I'm trying to tie this analysis to that 160 million, at least in the beginning. And the easiest way to do that was that simple ratio of, hey, if we right now have 878 students, but we're building capacity for 1,130, then it's that new capacity that we want to apply the impact. And I think if we go the other route, if we say, hey, there's a little more capacity here that could be absorbed, then that means there's less that we can apply to the impact fee.
I understand.
So I
So-
was looking for.
I think you're doing about as good as you can. So the capacity we have today is largely consists of temporary units or portables. So I don't know that we have a good answer for what our capacity is today,
And-
other than how many kids we have there.
Right, and it seemed easy to take those two numbers and say, hey, if you've got 878 now, that's the number of students that the existing population, is generating. And so we want to help figure out how to pay for that 252 extra slots that are being built.
Like, the two things we have that are still, is a robust enrollment study done, that I think is, and it should be part of the strategies. And a plan of the project is very specific, of where the period capacity, for that capacity is, that investment being made at the
Mhm.
kind of bypassing what we're, but for argument's sake, I think produce a heyday investment.
And that's open.
Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, that's why there's 4 scenarios. There's 2 scenarios based on K through 3 enrollment, and there's 2 scenarios based on the K through 8. And I'll tell you why I like the K through 3 when we get done.
So I don't want to get off on a tangent here, but and I understand why you're focused on K3 and K8. But is it true that most of the, the bubble and most of the enrollments occur in this K-8 group, that there is very limited high school new enrollments, I would think, in general? Is that true?
That's my observation.
It makes sense, yeah. Okay,
Those
thank you.
kids move up.
Yeah.
So they might come over, they might move to town when they're in second, third grade, but.
Yeah.
Eventually it impacts the high school when it
Yeah.
moves up through.
And so if we use the K through 3, again, because the difference in the projections are, there's a higher percentage of new students in K through 3 versus K through 8.
Mhm.
So when we look at the K through 8, which is a legitimate way to look at it, given that we're making improvements throughout, when we look at K through 8, we wind up getting a lower percentage because that difference between new students and the existing enrollment is a smaller percentage.
In actual fact, as I recall, the project costs of the 144 million, all but 7, that 144 is being invested.
And I also think it's very curious to look at the total costs of K through 8. Because the shift is happening, because we need space in the K through 3. So that whole solution, all those costs associated with the K through 8, it's still reasonable to go back and say, if I'm looking to say why we're doing all of that, it's to build this new school. And we have to do a few other things over here, which is perfectly legitimate to include in your impact fees. But if I use the K through 8 enrollment, K through 3 enrollment, I get the highest number that we can apply to the impact fee. And legitimately so, I don't think there's any, there's no underhandedness or anything about that. I mean, it's a perfectly, I think, legitimate way to look at it.
So new construction obviously qualifies. Portables, we've decided qualifies. What about renovations to existing schools? Those would be considered capital expenditures as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's in 60 books, there's some work being done at the school. And all that. So that's included.
Thank you.
Work project that's been defined.
Yep. I understand.
It has to be a real project. So if you wanted to do a different project, you'd have to do your calculations based on that.
Right, and it's fair to, to look at, see if there's anything else that, you're gonna wanna put in that 160 million, that's a capital expense. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's kind of breathtaking looking at what these fees are coming out at though. Wow.
So that's
true cost.
No, it's fair. It is.
But, and that's why we looked at how many years you want to look at payback. And it's perfectly allowable under the state law to pay yourself back over time. Because you don't want to have I assume that nobody wants to put a $13,000 impact fee on homes given what the prices are. So if you want to spread that impact out, there's no reason, there's nothing that says you can't do that to lower that impact.
One thing that does bother me about this, however, it does seem like we get in a little bit of a box of like feeding the monster, okay, that, oh gee, we don't want to lose any money that we could have for captured value. Well, it's going to push you in the direction of doing more and more building, more and more capital investment in newer schools. And it seems to me that that's, that sort of creates a dynamic that, might prevent us from taking other approaches to solving, for the capacity issues.
Rather than the impact fee.
Yep. But
So, though that may be true, what we know is that we, at the very least, we will allow at least 10%. No. I'm working up the growth.
Oh, yeah, you have to allow at least, I think it's 105%.
5% of the lot.
Okay.
So
okay,
just keep in mind, we don't have an impact, we're gonna still see some level of.
Yeah.
And you're not planting any So
Have we ever had to, have we ever gotten to the point, Tom, where we have to consider, refunding or, we have, if I'm jumping ahead, please tell me if I want to hold back, but that's obviously something we want to avoid. Yeah.
that's.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I'm not surprised that we've done it the last couple of years. We put this money to use really quickly. So I think for other fees, some of the traffic fees, I think that's an exposure. Developers who pay it over the years could potentially claim, hey, we're not used to return it. And the statute actually requires us to have mechanism to do so. No one ever made that formal request, but.
And there is some risk with this one where it is a clearly defined project that hasn't been executed yet. So let's say we adopt the impact fee, we start charging it for a couple of years before that project even takes off. If that project never happens, then you could be on the hook for having to refund it. I imagine we can be probably broad enough to allow ourselves room to pivot in a couple of years, but that's an issue.
And then, so in scenario 2, the only difference is, I was trying to give a nod to not all new students come from new units being built.
Mhm.
And I'm gonna be the first to say, I think the number that I used, the methodology that I used certainly overestimates the amount of students coming from new development.
Mhm.
But we, this is just so you know what was done. We said, all right, if there's 35 million or 36 million, or sorry, let's go back to the 22.3% of the total cost of development to be allocated to impact fees. Scenario 1 takes 100% of that, doesn't make any nod to existing turnover. So scenario 2, I went back and sadly the census does not put out exactly what we need. There's always a little bit of a little hole in what they provide in terms of being able to calculate this. But they do allow you, if you go to a larger area, to go back in and write your own cross tabulation. And so that's what I did. I wrote a cross tabulation that says in this larger region, which is really the Portland suburban region. So it takes out Portland, South Portland, Westbrook, and somebody else. Anyway, so this suburban region is what they call it, is really a mix of communities. And it allows you to run that very narrow table that says, tell me how many students or how many kids age 5 to 17 is what I used, are in each type of unit by bedroom size. So it can generate, that's what I use to generate this. And because it's, it's a summarized number of all these different regions, I really do feel like it over exaggerates the amount that's coming from the new build, particularly given some of the information we've seen before and some of our own calculations. But it was an easy number to generate and probably to justify as well. So for that simple analysis, right, sorry. Okay, so that's where the 96% came from. 96% of the students going to 93%. Thank you, I can't read. That's the percentage that I assigned to new builds, to new housing development. And that's why that number is just slightly lower than the first one, because it winds up being 20.7% as opposed to 22.3% that you can apply. And then what you see is, if we wanted to be paid back over 10 years and we have 261 units coming online each year, I just simply took that impact fee and divided by the number of units that would happen in 10 years, 15, 20, and so on until 30. So that's the number that's generated. Obviously, scenario 2 is a little bit less. Because we're using a smaller percentage going to the impact fees. Scenarios 3 and 4. You said there was a 2 on this yet, but anyway, 3 and 4 are the K-8 solution. And the only difference here is that the percentage generated for the impact fees, total impact fees, is based on a smaller increase in capacity. And that's because we're not really building the capacity as much in the grade. And I took the numbers for the existing and for the, the 10-year, straight from the report. So that's where those numbers are from.
How do you arrive at the per unit pricing?
I took the total impact fee that we can charge. So let's look at scenario 1. That's 35.7 million. And then I said, all right, well, we're gonna build 261 units per year. If we're maxing out the growth, the rate of growth ordinance. And I said, in 10 years, we're gonna have 2,610 units. And I divided that back into the impact fee, say, from the 2,610 units that are happening in 10 years, we need to generate that $35.7 million.
But your pricing, is that straight line or you have an inflation factor? So that would be understated then.
Correct.
Which,
We add in some, inflation for financing and other things.
I see.
Yes.
so just stay with that for a minute if we could. So if we do it that way, then that would mean we would have a low risk of overcharging on impact fees, right? If we don't have an inflation factor, right? It would, right?
True.
Right.
I probably shouldn't call it an inflation because it's really a financing charge.
I see.
Right?
But we know that building costs and the cost of, construction are through the roof.
Right.
Through the atmosphere here, but so you had a statement at the bottom, we're building fewer houses, so we're receiving fewer impact fees. I'm assuming you could apply the houses to units, right? If you're building fewer units, you
We're
have
building
fewer
more
impact
apartments.
fees.
Just wanna
Okay,
because we actually- Last 5 years, certainly increased the number of units.
But not houses. So-
okay, I see.
So I
see.
think
Houses
the current
versus-
impact fee schedule, if you have a 1 bedroom, you pay less in the house. So because we've changed the mix of
I
what we're
see.
building, our collections have gone down.
Okay,
I think that's exactly what's going on. If it's an apartment, we're collecting less. Theoretically balanced because they're generating.
but a
This
single,
is going the other way, though. This is saying all units are equal.
Exactly, and that's the other question I have here. If we want to divide that out, that if we want to have a sliding rate, that we would have to do that. And I'm trying to think mathematically, what's the right way to do that? I look back at how the existing ordinance does it, and it's just, it's basically, saying it's 25. The multifamily is 25% of the single family, and then the last category, which is, I think, senior housing, is 50% of it. So we can back into that. I think we may be able to get some better numbers or clearer numbers.
so you're trying to normalize between houses and units.
Exactly.
So today, the ordinance says if you have a 1 bedroom, you probably won't have a kid in it, so you shouldn't pay as much of a fee. I have a slightly different perspective on that because I think by creating some of the units we've been creating, we've enabled movement within Scarborough. So somebody who maybe would have stayed in their house longer can now find a suitable place in Scarborough, and that house is now going to be filled with kids. So that unit does have an impact, even though there might not be a kid there. So I think we understate probably today. I think this would overstate it, go too far, because at the same time, you don't want to have a ridiculous fee on what's supposed to be affordable condo. or apartment. But the right answer is probably somewhere in the middle.
I think
This is kind of the first cut, very kind of data-driven scientific approach. In the final analysis, I think there needs to be some art in deciding.
And if that's something that we definitely want to do, we want to continue to explore the impact of different types of units. You know, we can look at the way the existing ordinance does, maybe we look at it in terms of numbers of bedrooms instead.
I was gonna say, if instead of units here, you had bedrooms,
Yep.
I think that would get you a pretty good number. And I don't know if we have that data.
No, you can get that. Well, we can get that data from the census, which is not always exactly the same. But I think with Autumn and I can put our heads together and see how different it would be to come up with that.
It seems to me that if this analysis would come up with a food or single family home, the others will be a variable problem.
We do it that way, too.
I will justify the percentage of that's the family. That is
The important thing is
discount that.
we want to come up with a way that the 2,610 units generates 35.7 million.
I see.
And there's some magic in there about how we get that, but we don't wanna undersell the multifamily and we don't wanna oversell the single family. But we know what number we need. And so some logical way of applying that to the different units.
Just
Yes,
as
it
an
was
aside, I provided an example earlier where we kindergarten students. Because the school obviously knows where the students live. We're able to do some analysis confidentially. As to the housing that the students will hold. And as I recall, over 90% of those from 90 kids were coming from a home that was 5 years old. So it wasn't a brand new house. And that might be a bit of an aberration, but you know, that kind of flows through this. There's the churn in our existing housing that is producing students as well. This simplistically really looks at the new housing starts. Undoubtedly, an impact on the existing. And we don't, so that way.
Yeah.
It has to-
Because theoretically, they paid an impact long ago. If it was built after 2002, they've already paid an impact. So that's really what we're looking at here. I think, again, the questions that we need to talk more about is, you know, how these fees affect affordable housing. And if there's some, and we're not going to have an answer for that today, I don't think, in terms of how you want to massage the numbers to get what we need in terms of the impact fee, but to also not overwhelm housing prices. And, you know, Don raises a good point. I mean, in the email that you sent me, I mean, yes, there's a great increase in the percentage of are in the housing prices. So, you know, maybe the impact fees that we're talking about as a percentage of the total housing is not that much. You know, $5,000, or let's call it $3,000 5 years ago, it might be the same percentage as it is today with the inflated value. Tom's gonna yell at me and say you're going down a road, but yeah, that's one thing that we can look at. And that seems like that could be a way to judge, hey, is, you know, a $6,000 or $7,000 impact fee, is that reasonable? Is that fair? So we can.
So on $1 million house,
Right,
a $6,000 impact fee isn't a huge deal. But if you're trying to build an apartment or a condo that you want to sell for 150,000, it's a much more significant piece of that pie.
I'm comfortable with everything we've talked about so far in terms of your, you know, your blend of art and science and how it's worked so far. But bear with me 1 minute. Could you explain, this is a bit micro, but how do we bill? Who pays for impact fees? So like a developer gets one in the mailbox when the tax bills are sent out, or how does that work?
they don't,
And so we collect them here and that's, yeah, okay, okay, good to know.
And with both of them. the big ones,
Right.
they go off and they do it themselves, but I think so that-
So do we hear people, I mean, if we were way off base, we'd be hearing about it, right? Or you hear about it, we don't hear about it. Okay,
And frankly, if you drop however well justified it is, with a sign of the different. I it's a great point, and you've been mindful of other policy objectives that are popular and very good on housing affordability. Make no mistake, there's all the cases, but the ultimate, the consumer is passing costs directly on.
Plus.
I'm very pleased to hear that. One follow-on question. So as we, get more and more volume, I'm sure there are some efficiencies, but if there's staff that we add, is that also a charge that could be factored into the impact fees? No, it's not capital.
For taxes.
Okay,
So they're gonna pay taxes and that's where that comes from.
I think we've got a lot better about understanding necessarily the different housing groups, and to the extent that we are encouraging the types that use that students. We're on the upside, we are getting more capital and they're costing us to provide the service too, so.
Great.
Yeah, the impact really tends to be very kind of surgical in these, but it's part of the overall really benefit spectrum. It's not the answer, but it's part of it.
And, so again, the question is if you guys are comfortable using the percentages.
I certainly am. I don't know about Don or Karen.
yeah, I'm comfortable. I still, would like to keep some, share of mind to looking at the total capacity issue rather than, just the building or just where the portables go. So, over time, I hope that we can not lose sight of that. Yeah. Yeah.
I can certainly look at that, with that generates. If we look at K through 12. So that's good. The next.
Karen, sorry. Karen,
I
was gonna say.
I was gonna say, I like scenario one. My question, and then I look at the impact fee ordinance that you provided. Is that what our current charges are right here, the types of dwelling? And so,
No, not. I'm not sure, when I put it out today.
I printed out our agenda.
Maybe a year old.
Well, I guess it doesn't matter. I think my question is, how does this compare to other similar towns?
That's the next thing that I need to do is I need to look
Okay.
at what the impact fees are
Yeah.
in other communities.
I am all for increasing fees if it's justifiable that to build a house next door in the next town over also has a similar fee. Because, I mean,
They
if you
don't.
don't live in Scarborough, you have to pay to live in Scarborough.
I think Wyndham had some school projects. They probably have a similar fee, but not all communities have this type of fee.
The best example is Buxton. Buxton. My knowledge is not a single impact. So at the gate, if for single family home, roughly speaking, they pay the $10,000 all in the fact, and all the different. So right out of the gate, a house in Scarborough is costs $10,000. Because. Having said that, so I think we're on the upper end of the total package piece.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's right. There's several communities that do the impact fees and several of them have recently updated, so.
Right, and I mean, I just generally think that we get feedback from the residents that they want to slow down growth. And I don't know if this is maybe one avenue to slow down growth is to make it maybe less affordable. I'm not saying I agree with it, but that's consistent message we hear is slow down growth. If it's maybe a little more expensive to develop in Scarborough, could that possibly slow it down? I would think.
Hasn't worked so far.
The other argument is, I think. That's what we're seeing on. Best we can isolate and identify it.
Now, the current ordinance exempts affordable if it's,
It just complicates them. Affordable,
2330.
yeah. And they are 50% of the single family.
Mhm.
Right. And then the exemption is for household use. Plus.
So it'd be senior.
Oh, it's just for
housing.
senior.
Right.
Okay,
And, the obvious rationale is not for the.
And then if you're,
But they do drive.
no, that's. good.
no, I'm just laughing at Norman, made a joke, that's okay.
So the senior housing doesn't pay, but affordable housing that's not senior. So,
The council can always waive so like, if we have a non-senior affordable housing development that's coming before us, that would be an option through some sort of approval to waive the fee for those units, right? Or like,
I think we would probably want to build that mechanism in the ordinance.
Currently, there's no type of waiver that you can provide for impact fees at all. Right?
Now, I'm quite sure in the ordinance that we bring forward, we would create that provision that expressly limits council to grant the waiver.
well, I'm just trying to, Southgate, for example, that was not strictly senior housing. You're creating affordable housing in town. I don't see a huge point to tacking on an impact fee for those units. It seems counterproductive to me. Probably did.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that time goes by, it's probably not unreasonable to expect. I know we had the similar question with Beacon at Gateway, they predicted that there would be, very limited impact, but there actually was more impact. So I'd say that over time, I'm sure there are examples of, somebody going to live with Uncle Joe or, with Grammy or Grampy or both, at age 55. I'm sure that there are a lot of examples where you do have school impacts in terms of students.
So the state law, the accessory buildings provides all sorts of new regulations, so we need to check whether accessory buildings can be charged.
Mhm.
So on the surface, I guess I'm more okay charging the fee if you broke it out by bedrooms for senior housing. Because I do think there's an impact, maybe not directly on that unit, but where they're coming from. But I'm a little less inclined to charge it for affordable,
Me too.
deed restricted affordable units.
Yeah, I'm the same opinion too.
So say something that a lesser amount for senior, but affordable. Affordable.
Waived. That's my thought.
Yeah,
I want to clarify something. I was thinking that is this deed restricted 55 plus as in no one under the age of 55 can live in that house?
It's probably at least one person.
Okay, so yeah, that changes my perspective because I used to sell senior living units way back in the day and it was no one under the age of 55 could live in that community.
Mhm.
If just one person in the house is 55, that is not senior housing to me. Unless it is a-
I said that.
So I apologize if I'm not understanding what this is, but I do not think that we should, I think the only time we shouldn't be charging seniors is if it's like a designated senior residence that says no one under the age of 55.
Hmm.
When I look at this, so if I
This
want
is
to
a
build a
state
house in
statute, though.
Scarborough, I could just have someone with 55 living in my house and they can get exempt.
The development would have to be
The whole development.
55 plus.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to understand.
Mhm.
Right, yeah.
We don't have deed restriction, there's not deed restriction that we enforce. Per se.
Right.
It's not something that we enforce.
There's.
They have internal.
now bear in mind, these are fees charged to the developer, not to the, right?
Yes.
Not-
By the time built.
Not to the individuals, or you know what I mean? Like.
Well, I guess.
the
that's how it's
operator.
done, but yes.
Well, that makes me think of, there was a senior housing unit near me that wanted to convert from senior to regular housing, so they avoided probably the impact fee, and then we're trying to convert to a regular residence where they would avoid the impact fee. That was one random scenario that I watched.
There's very strict controls to the, like, to the funding that
Mhm.
they have.
Mhm.
You know, creates those.
So in my notes, what I have is, you know, we're gonna focus on the K through 3 numbers. We're going to, look a little bit more at the, existing units versus the brand new units and see if there's, any more information we can, look at with that. We're gonna look at the history of, the impact fee as a percentage of sales prices over time, to see if we're getting out of whack. We're gonna look at some other communities, to see what their impact fee is. We're gonna focus on, breaking the price up by type of unit, really by bedroom sizes, or maybe just numbers of bedrooms. And we're gonna look at that. And we do need to talk a little bit, we need to work out a strategy of senior versus the affordable housing, and maybe what are different scenarios for that. All with packaging it so that we still get $33 to $35 million.
John, when you say that you want to do a bedrooms, are you saying like, let's get rid of the single family, two family, multiplex and say 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom?
I don't want to definitively say that, but that's the thought that
I'm
I
more
have.
inclined to get rid of,
I feel like that might be more fair.
I think
And it
so.
would take care of the senior issue and
Right.
the different, so if we understand how many units of each type that we're looking to allow, we probably, I suspect we can get our handle on that. Then it's just changing the denominator.
And then you may want to treat the deed restricted portion different.
That might be one that we need to have an exemption or something.
The only other two areas that direction is whether we should also put in expense.
I think we should.
Yes.
And then assume, I think we should mirror the payback on the expected sale of the bonds.
Yeah, exactly. I think having all those, because it just makes a lot of sense.
So this being a spreadsheet, you know, it's changing those, there is way to, but we'll do some more thinking about how a better way of making, move forward with a rational, a variable rates based on.
I mean, the best way, honestly, is probably value of the home, but you don't know that when you're issuing the building permit.
Right.
So I don't know that you could, but you know how many bedrooms are going to be in it, so that might be a proxy that gets you there.
Yes, the right questions, and actually get an answer.
Cool.
So, see what we can touch on there.
So this is extremely helpful, as you see, there's a lot of, there's no right answer. You see, and I think because we are all then, at the end of the day, I like it as simple as possible for us to understand and specify. And it's easy to overcome. So. I appreciate it.
Good job pulling it together. It's it's complicated stuff. I think you made it seem reasonably easy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We can make it. I know.
Any other- No. Any other questions for Karen? Any members of the public that would like to comment or anything? Thank you for coming, Marvin. Nobody online? Okay, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Can I just ask one question? I think you may have talked earlier about the next agenda.
Yes, we talked a little bit about the next two. The next agenda, we were trying to tee up a, Liam, you want to go with Public Works, vehicle maintenance and replacement schedules?
Yeah, I
So-
think just doing some baseline understanding for, I think, again, this has been a reoccurring question through the budget process. How do we manage our fleet? So better understanding not only our vehicle maintenance program, but how we determine what vehicles need to be replaced and on what interval, and maybe some overview around perhaps while we're on the subject, our kind of intergovernmental agreements and revenue associated with that. So just trying to provide more of a presentation than any sort of action from the committee.
And then tentatively for October, was having the fire department come in and
Do another presentation around, again, not only their operational budget, but certainly their capital budget with regard to apparatus. Maybe some initial thoughts on staffing and what they're seeing for changes in that, because it does, again, kind of inform and intersect with the budget process.
Also, potentially, the key system. Get better reflect, service delivery.
oh, interesting. They're looking at that.
They'll probably be I mean to bury the lead, but they'll
That's
probably,
okay.
a large portion of what we discuss is, again, giving someone education for what the business looks like these days and what calls for service they're receiving and what our ability is to recoup, or associate fees with those services that we don't really have now.
Cool.
So I did have one question. I spoke to John about earlier. I didn't add this to the agenda, but since we're, I don't expect this, what? It's okay for me to go ahead.
Go ahead, yeah.
I noticed in the, and this is shifting a little bit to the, there are a number of finance items on in the packet for the council meeting tomorrow. I won't go through a lot of them, but there was one question I had about our bond rating. And there was material there from Joe Gutierrez. So are we expecting that he's going to be there to talk us through that? Or is that something that we get to pre-read and have our questions ready? And will we know what we're looking at in terms of interest rates and our credit rating?
The original intent, the diamond workshop, and you know that has changed. So that was prepared with that thought in mind. I included it having a few available to attend the meeting tomorrow and council chair indicated that we to speak.
Okay, good, great.
Fairly brief comments.
I bet.
And then no expectations. We'll have a workshop.
Okay, okay, great. Thank you
And I
very
should
much.
say that the portfolio and the analysis in the packet does take in or does assume $5 million launch.
Okay,
So we're fine. But yeah, that road. Perhaps it is really, the intent is. And then I just do.
well, the good news is he'll be there and be able to tell us what's happening or not with the credit markets and our reading, so.
Can be done. Meeting agenda items, so I think it's somewhat limited in the formality of that setting, but yes.
Sue actually asked a similar question today and we bounced it off Joe, but what do we expect for interest rates? And he provided some interesting feedback where it looks like the guidance is they might hold flat for a period, but in the year plus horizon, they expect them to start coming down again now. Which
The other thing I find particularly important that's been helpful, I think is being received by the council in his packet, even though it was updated, kind of the fiscal matters, one of the behaviors is well. Puts us in expecting how the US in the context of all other countries. Doesn't ultimately produce what our rating is, but it's a pretty good position. Where we're strong and where we're not, and that is very informs whether we'll be a greater rate.
So when will that decision be made on our credit rating?
But we'll be sitting with rating agencies later this month, early September, with respect to the $9 million launch.
Right.
Your agenda for it.
That's our annual CIP.
Right, that's
review.
the filing that we're working through now, so we'll have a very real-time example
Okay,
in our hands by late September.
okay. And there's a timing effect. I mean, whatever number is determined or not, at some point in the future, that would have different
That would be
timing.
a very good early, very good indicator of what we can expect going forward, but we will have the same process with respect to this much larger one, which we would like them done over 3 or 4 different years.
Yep. So another deep dive when we,
Yeah, we would have to back through the same sort of rigors with the rating agencies, but I think it's a very good indication of where we are.
and they're gonna know about they knew the school was on the horizon the last time they rated us, but it wasn't as real of a project, I don't think at that point, so. I think they're gonna bake some of that into the ratings that they're giving us.
Also, part of the rating model, been through the past system.
I'm still trying to get my head around the idea of putting a number out for a vote, and we don't really know the number, so. yet.
Well, we know it can't be more than that's the number. The number you put out is no more than.
Well,
It can always be, it can only be less. The other question you asked, I thought was a good one, is in the packet tomorrow,
Yeah.
there's reaffirming the school budget breakdowns.
Yeah.
And Kate, since you're here. Can you talk us through that?
All right, I
It's-
thought this meeting was over, John.
It almost
Yeah.
was. Tom,
Sorry.
To adjourn,
Sorry.
and here I am, right? So every year you guys have that same motion before you. It's a state statute that says that the town council, once the community is voted, has to go back and say, yep, this is what the school budget is gonna be. So the numbers that are in that format are basically broken out based on the way the state wants to see them, what the state's giving us for subsidy, what they're requiring us to provide for our students, the extra amount that we're providing, they break out debt service. So they do it in a few different ways, but it's essentially an affirmation of the budget that's already been. approved.
and it's the same budget, they're the same numbers as what you brought us.
Same numbers as what you've seen.
Already
for
approved.
The bottom line,
Many
that's
months.
what approved in the voters value.
Great.
It's the line item we're never supposed to touch, but we get to see it.
So most of it is broken out into those budget categories that go before the voters. You'll see there's a whole section that reflects that little
Right.
chart. And then the rest of it is basically formed around the types of the way the Department of Education breaks up the types of funding. So that's based on the EPS program, and it splits the allocations that the community is making into different categories, if you will, in terms of how we're appropriating the funds. But really, the bottom line is the bottom line that's already been approved by the council and the voters of Scarborough. And it's just, there has to be a town council vote to say, yep, this is what it is. Our voters have said so. And so I do send up to the state, to the Department of Ed, I send the minutes of your meeting where you've adopted the budget on behalf of the school department. And I send them a voter validation certification that Tody gives me that says, here's what the vote was. They just want to make sure that we did all of our legal duties. And we have a legit budget.
It is later this year than most, and that's simply a function of the way the summer meeting schedule the calendar fell.
Well, and if we had had the referendum earlier.
We pushed the referendum back too.
So it's usually in.
It's in July, yeah.
It's a great cure for insomnia at any hour of the day. Read that kind of reading.
Are you
Believe me.
saying I'm a cure?
No, it's nothing personal, just. the
Thank you,
subject
those-
matter.
Department of Education, EPS formula. Down there.
So any other rabbit holes you want to go down?
Thanks.
Anybody? No? Okay. Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor? Thank you, everybody. We're done. Have a great night.